then the environment was cleaned up.
The first time I was hearing about this stuff, it was totally new to me.
With social impact consulting.
Hello everyone, how you doing today? Welcome to another exciting episode of the Development Sector Series, which is Devsectorseries. Do remember to like, follow, and subscribe to our social media platforms so you can get prompt reminders each time we're live in our interactive sessions. I also encourage you, join our mailing list and click the link on this description, to join our broadcast. Again, like I said, follow and connect with me on all my social media handles. And guess what? We have
The environment was cleaned up.
The first time I was hearing about this stuff, it was totally new to me.
With social impact consulting.
Hello everyone, how you doing today? Welcome to another exciting episode of the Development Sector Series, which is Devsectorseries. Do remember to like, follow, and subscribe to our social media platforms so you can get prompt reminders each time we're live in our interactive sessions. I also encourage you, join our mailing list and click the link on this description, to join our broadcast. Again, like I said, follow and connect with me on all my social media handles. And guess what? We have a new social impact consulting LinkedIn page, so I encourage you to follow. So one more thing, if you have any questions about the discussions in this program, drop a message in the comment section so that we can engage in a really interactive discussion. And also let me know your name and where you're hailing from so that after this broadcast, I can just give you a shout out and thank you for coming. So today we're going to be having discussions about disability inclusion and the movement with one of the key players who has worked in this sector to make sure that persons with disabilities have the rights and inclusion they need nationwide and all around Africa. Our guest today, Ms. Ekaete Judith Umoh, will be discussing with us about disability inclusion. Are we there yet? So what I'm going to do is share her video bio, and then I will bring her up and we will have a wonderful discussion. Ekaete Judith Umoh has over 20 years experience as an international disability rights advocate and inclusive development expert in issues relating to gender, disability, and development. Her passion is to see increased visibility of women and girls with disabilities in development efforts to promoting inclusive development for people with disabilities around the world. In 2014, she became the first elected female president of the Joint National Association of Persons with Disabilities, JONAPWD, the umbrella body of all disability organizations in Nigeria. She is actively involved in the following international bodies: the Secretary of the Africa Disability Forum, Vice Chairperson of the West African Federation of the Disabled, a member of the UN Women Civil Society Advisory Group, Gender Task Team of the International Disability Alliance, member of the International Advisory Committee of Mobility International USA, and a proud alumni of MIUSA's Women's Institute of Leadership and Disability, WILD. She is the founder, CEO at FACIB Disability Plus, an organization that seeks to promote the inclusion of women and girls with disabilities in all gender and development efforts. As an activist, Ms. Umoh was part of the larger struggles that led to the signing of the Nigerian Disability Bill into law in 2019 after over 17 years of consistent advocacy. Furthermore, she has served as a consultant on social inclusion to several international development agencies, providing technical assistance on disability inclusion in programs and project designs. Ms. Umoh is widely traveled, a trainer, and public speaker. She has delivered so many papers at several international conferences and other public functions on disability inclusion in women's programs and other development efforts globally. She's an activist, microbiologist, virologist, a certified laboratory scientist, and educationist. She holds a postgraduate diploma in education and a master's degree, MSc, in social works. Allow me to introduce to some and present to others Miss Ekaete Judith Umoh.
Hello, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I mean, you've done such great work. I mean, I was like, when I was reading your bio, I said, wow. And, one thing that fascinates me about, development experts and some of us who are just in the trenches and just do the work is that you're approachable. It's part of all your accomplishments and all the accolades. It's just, you're like, it's just me trying to make an impact and, and wanting to do more. So again, you're extremely busy. Thank you so much for taking your time to have a conversation with us.
Thank you so much for that very wonderful introduction. Listening in, I was just wondering if it was me you were introducing, but thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
No worries. So we're just going to get started. People have been looking forward to our conversation. So give us a sense of your story. What led you to start the work on disability inclusion?
Well, that would be like a fairly long story, but I'll try as much as possible to see if I can make it a little bit short. Disability inclusion is a word that is just coming up. I didn't have an idea of what disability inclusion is. For instance, for me, it's all about passion driven. I just wanted a society where we're all very happy and doing stuff together. My childhood days was very beautiful. I'm a polio survivor. Let me just establish that. So the people will be wondering, oh, why is she doing this work? I'm sure you didn't say that in my bio, but I'm a polio survivor, but that didn't change anything. That didn't change anything because I had these very supportive families and I went to school and did everything that my peers did until I got to the university. And then I was put in an accommodation that I didn't quite understand why we were all clustered in one particular block. And I saw, sisters who had, different kinds of impairments, be it sickle cell anemia, be those are blind. And I challenged it. I remember going to the student affairs officer to say, look, thank you very much for this beautiful accommodation. It looks like a rehabilitation center to me. I'm not going to have it. And it was like, oh, you go back. You disabled people are so troublesome. I say, yeah, I'm going to be troublesome for once. I don't like this. Why don't you take me to other blocks? Why will you cluster all of us in one space? And so I kept giving him trouble, and he kept accommodating my troubles until we had a deal. And he said, come, Ekaete, you know something? We're going to have this deal. You just stay there for one semester. And if you're still not very happy, I promise you, I may even give you an off-campus accommodation, very beautiful. I will struck that deal and say, go back, just go and stay there. And he says to me, I think they need you on that floor. They need you on that block, go back. So I took that as a challenge and I went back. It was my interaction with my sisters on that block that actually opened my eyes to the fact that people could really go through some kinds of discrimination just because they had an impairment. Some came from broken homes simply because they had them. So you can imagine those kind of stereotype and stigmatization that was happening. That was when my eyes was actually open to what disability. I never heard the word disabled my whole life. I was born and brought up in Delta states, Niger Delta, and it was just okay. I never heard the word disabled. It was very strange to me until I got to university. And so that was where my interest started. And being who I am, I just thought I would begin to do things that I would do. And so generally after university, I started my activism. It was my interaction with the women and the women's movement rather that I saw something that looked like exclusion. Not intentionally though. I saw that most of the activities then 20 years back, not now that everyone is so aware, talking about 20 years plus behind, I found that the women with disabilities were so invisible within the women's movement. We are so invisible, and activities and programs were designed in such a way that didn't even take our existence into recognition. So it was then I knew what exclusion meant for the first time. And I started working towards pushing for the visibility of women with disabilities in the mainstream women's movement. That would just be my short story about how I came about inclusion, and then there's not been going back since 20 years plus now. And so that has been it. That would just be the general story around it. But I mean, we'll discuss some more as we move on.
That is a fascinating story. So I didn't even know that you were a polio survivor, which is really something. And it is a fascinating story as not allowing, what we're going through to affect our output. So, well done. That's a really fascinating story. So now you've already spoke about in terms of how you were received by stakeholders from your teacher and family, and how your activism was received. Can you just talk a bit more about how you were received by stakeholders and even including the government when you really started your work?
Well, 20 years ago, disability inclusion wasn't something that was glamorous. Mm-hmm. People were still struggling to understanding what people with disability were doing in the development space. They had this very well-known approach to disability issue, was just charity, helping us, giving us good, used clothes, bags of rice. Everybody needs bags of rice. I mean, one bag of rice or the other. Need food, need charity. Charity shouldn't be pushed to just persons with disability. So that was how they were relating with persons with disability. So when I came up with this approach, it was so destructive. It was like she was asking for too much. I mean, when you're talking about education, they'll be talking about a school for the handicapped, those kind of labeling. So people were struggling to unlearn all that they've ever known about disability, because it had been from the charity perspective. It wasn't based on human rights. You didn't even have the voice to ask for a right. You should just be happy that people are taking care of you, you are eating food and everything is, you're fine. So I met some resistance, and at times it could be very annoying. I'm saying that 20 years back was very annoying. It was like, what noise is this? It was also extremely patronizing. Okay, disabled. Hey, don't worry. Hey, let's just say, let them go with their trouble. It was difficult. Then I'm so happy that lots of voices were amplifying our voices around these issues. Because I was presenting to them as at that time, these are people who are entitled to their rights, and they're natural part of any community, entitled to whatever rights that anyone has. But it was like, no, these are people who should be cared for, who should just be happy that we are taking care of them. So when you talk about disability issues around welfareism, and I wanted to participate. So in as much as I'm not blaming anyone, because I know there's been increased level of knowledge around disability and development. 20 years ago wasn't funny. 20 years ago, I was almost labeled as that very troublesome young girl. Then now I'm more mature and getting elderly, who will always push and shout. At times, it was so annoying that they just allow me shout and put their heads on the ground. When I'm done, they lift up their heads. So, but I am happy that now everyone is, if not for anything, saying disability inclusion, they begin to understand that it's a human rights issue, it is a development issue, and it's something that's adding value to whatever work that we are doing. So government, well, it was about hey, give us our rights. Remember the disability bill that is now law? That was still 17 years ago. Stakeholders, they were some kind of disconnect even amongst us, because some of us didn't really approach it from the human right and development perspective. Some of us understood it from give me this, give me that, give me that. So we still had that kind of struggle within the movement. Some of us give me some, this is my space. But I think we're all getting to be on the same page as it is when it has to do with human rights and development.
Interesting. When I really started working in the sector in Abuja, and then working with some disability rights organizations, one of which is, you already know, Inclusive Friends Association, and briefly with Centers for Citizens with Disabilities. They were having a conversation about the rights-based approach. You know what I mean? Instead of just saying, oh, give me based on charity and what have you. That has its place, but a rights-based approach, because everybody is a human, so it's human rights. So it was quite enlightening for me, and you're even sharing more light on that as well. That's really something. So now you said you've been working in the movement now for a while now, and you talked about how the government received you in terms of your advocacy. Let's talk about the general public here. So in your journey of advocacy within the past couple of decades, how did it work with citizens, and how were we able to work on perception?
Big issue. Well, perception. One of the greatest barriers that we face has to do with perception, maybe the negative attitudes as it were. But generally, let me say that Nigerians are not bad people. I tell you, they can be very emotional and sympathetic. And, but charity will just go just far, might not really get us there. So everyone wanted to help. No one was that outrightly very wicked and say, oh, this disabled person, I'll kill you today, or get out from there. Obvious. There were not that kind of obvious discrimination. They were very silent. But I noticed that within society, there was some kind of, it boils down to attitude again, and discriminatory practices that did not go down well. Some of them were very silent, and so, and when you try to assert, my problem has always been when I try to assert, because society has a way of perceiving persons with disability, and they also have, I don't know where they got that from, what we should and should not do, and the limit we should go. Those are stereotypes. And they believe, oh, as a disabled person, this is where you should stop. So when you become so assertive about a particular thing, it's like, and she's disabled. So this kind of attitude. And once I get to notice that, I'll get a little bit more troublesome and keep pushing. Because I don't know where else I'll go. So this is my space. I belong here. I'm a citizen. So in as much as people want to help, they help based on the level of understanding that they have about disability. So if we want to contextualize this conversation in the space of development, then it's a different ball game. Even practitioners who wants to do disability issue still are struggling with the how. People will just say, oh, like you're talking about disability inclusion. Yes, include me, put that RAM, put that thing, put sign language. It is far beyond that. And I used to tell colleagues, if people could go to university to read disability studies up to PhD level, what do you think they were doing there? We're not all talking about RAMs and staircases and sign language to get to do first degree, second degree, and a PhD. You now have disability studies up to PhD level. So it's a very serious issue. It's a very, very serious aspect of development, that has been left out. So generally, it depends on their level of knowledge and awareness. They will treat persons with disability, based on that. But I will not rate everyone, the same and maybe using like a one-size-fits-all approach. No, I mean, that very illiterate woman in the village seeing me as a person with disability will relate with me based on knowledge and maybe the kinds of socio-cultural beliefs or whatever is available to her. And I do not expect that somebody who has a PhD and a professor and is a development practitioner should relate with me that same way. But again, it depends on the level of knowledge available and understanding. So it's mixed. It's mixed. It's mixed. Depends on the class. But if you want to pull it down to disability and development, then we will now be talking specifics here and what inclusivity should mean. And that is where we really have an issue now. And we hope that people can take the patience to learn some more and unlearn all those things that are not helpful in the work that they do. So disability inclusion is a different ballgame. Maybe if we get to the question that will allow me explain some more, maybe I will also talk some more. But I would say within society, people will treat you depend on the number of the level of knowledge available, and maybe with a mix of social, cultural, religious beliefs, as it were, and that's how they relate with you.
Thank you for that very eloquent answer. It gives us insight in terms of, how the reception, depending on the knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
So in terms of, a person with disability would just have certain, it's just in terms of managing expectations. So if you're a market woman, this is the expectation you get from her. Or for someone who is more enlightened, there should be expectations concerning in terms of inclusivity. It's very, very, very insightful. Thank you for that answer. So we're just gonna go into, you're not just a practitioner in Nigeria and advocating for inclusivity in Nigeria. You're all over Africa and even globally. So compared to the world standards, based on what you have seen, and you are extremely well traveled where you have traveled. So where do you feel like Nigeria ranks, or an Africa? Do we even meet up with regards to inclusion, and how far do we have to go?
Okay. It's a good thing that we have signed and ratified UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and excellent that we also have a piece of legislation protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. If you had asked me the same question like before 2019, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 2/10 for Nigeria. And I would defend that. But good a thing we have stepped up. We now have a law, we have signed, we have ratified, things are falling in place. We now have a commission, for persons with disability. So I will give Nigeria 6/10 for now. Yes, because we now have like a framework. It's now left for us to operationalize those frameworks. So it's in our hands as it is now. I will not go to government and say, oh, you've given us the basic. That's why I'm giving Nigeria 6/10. But you and I, we agree that a piece of legislation will not automatically translate to the rights that we are looking at. So it means we have so much work to do. So rating Nigeria 6/10 because we should tell ourselves, congratulate ourselves for putting those basic, instruments in place that will help us now do the pushing and every other thing. So that will be it. And we hope that we will not stay on 6/10 for the next 20 years. I hope that by God's grace, helping our government and everyone, we should move so fast so that in the near future, we should be looking like 9/10 or thereabout.
Okay. Well, I'm thankful that amid what's been going on in the country, I'm just happy that we are moving forward in the aspect of disability rights and inclusion in terms of providing the frameworks. Now, as you know, with my next question, we're now going into civil society and our sector now. So in our sector, development sector, disability inclusion has become a buzzword. Okay, so how are stakeholders implementing inclusion? And in that question, I even want to feed into the Disability Rights Act. And are we working with stakeholders to operationalize that? Since the disability inclusion is now the buzzword, like, what are your thoughts on that?
In the first place, I'm so excited that the word disability inclusion is getting so popular. It's not like a jingle. Everybody wants it. You write your proposal. If it's not there, you've not started. Wow. 20 years ago. 20 years ago, It wasn't something anybody wanted to talk about. It was gender, youth, gender youth. So I'm just excited that at least people are relating with the word disability and even the inclusion. Whether you like it or not, it has to be incorporated into it. That's fine. But that is where the issue is now. How are we, promoting inclusion? What do we see as inclusion? And permit me to say here that if we are talking of inclusion, it means there would have been an exclusion somewhere. I mean, it means that exclusion has been happening and you want to bring in something. Something was out and wants to come in. So there must be there would have been an exclusion for you to be talking about inclusion. So if we want to do any work around inclusion, it would be nice for us to be sincere, sit back and say, what was it in the first place that excluded us? What was it? And so what are we trying to bring in what is it that we're trying to design that will bring about the inclusion? What was it that excluded us in the first place? Not until we understood properly what the exclusion issues are all about, it will be very, very difficult for us to begin to talk about inclusion, as it were. So in the development sector, how do we see disability inclusion? And this will only take me back to what each time I train, I like to start from Disability 101. I won't take it for granted that everybody will all on the same page on that. So if you are trying to promote inclusion, it means you are trying to address the issues of exclusion. So what were the issues of exclusion, or what are those issues that currently exclude us? That is where the lack of understanding and knowledge gap is currently for most of us in the development sector. So if I just buzzed into someone and just said, okay, are you doing disability inclusion? Say, yes, we are doing disability. What is it? We invited one deaf person who brought sign language interpreter, and we did this. And so our just appearing and the workshop is inclusion. Then that's good. It's a good step. It's a first step. But we are just scratching the surface of inclusion. And in doing disability inclusion, we need to carefully look at those barriers that has in the first place excluded us, that has restricted our participation. We need to put an eye on that. And that our framework from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability describes, in a very elaborate term, who persons with disabilities are. It says we have impairment. There's no denying the fact. But the way our impairment interacts with the barriers we meet in the society is what causes the disability or the exclusion that we are talking about. So it therefore means that we are not apologetic of our impairment. We are not apologizing. Oh, we have impairment, we are not apologizing. But rather we are challenging society. We are saying that the way society is designed and constructed did not even take into consideration that we exist. And so society was designed, everything around society is designed in a way that that seems to us like a one size fits all. But of course, it is a one size fits all. So in attempting to participate, we meet some barriers. So disability inclusion would just be all of us working collectively to removing those barriers that have stood in our ways for effective participation. Those things that are actually stopping us from participating effectively is what we should be working at removing. It's not fixing those who have impairment. I'm a polio survivor. And I have the right to exist here. And that is the beauty of diversity. What I'm saying is that in all your program design, do you know I exist? And how am I supposed to participate? So if I want to break it down a little bit, that the barriers could just be, structural, environmental, or whatever, but we could just call that institutional barriers. Attitude is one of those crazy barriers that we're still struggling with, and that could be the attitudinal barrier. And we see that a lot when it comes to employment. No matter how intelligent you are, no matter how smart you are, you could do an online interview and come top. When it's time for face-to-face and you show up in your wheelchair, there's that reaction. Oh, okay. And quickly they dismiss you and say, okay, you will hear from us. They wouldn't even give you the chance for you to, in the first place, try, just because you are a wheelchair user, or maybe you're blind, or you have one form of payment or the other. So in attempting to, let me take that as an example. Let's take disability inclusion in employment. How would we address that? That would just be a case of knowing that people with disability have the right to work, and checking through your workplace policies to see what policies you have in place that can accommodate the needs of persons with disability to effectively work for you or be productive in that sector. And that is what will take us again to Article 2 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, that speaks to reasonable accommodation. Those tiny, tiny adjustments that you need to make, or those policy that you need to tweak a bit, that will allow us to participate effectively and be productive. So it is a whole big, like a whole semester course. But what I want to say here is that if we have to talk about disability inclusion, we should first of all try to understand what actually excluded us in the first place. That kind of good understanding of issues that has to do with exclusion will effectively allow us to know how to design programs to include persons with disabilities.
Interesting. This is like you said, this is a semester course. I mean, very very enlightening, and really giving us the insight on the challenges of persons with disabilities, and creating that enabling environment, which is yes, for the sector as we implement programs, but also as citizens in terms of how on that attitudinal change, like you said. But really, now we've talked about the development sector. You spoke a bit on the corporate sector. You spoke a bit on the corporate sector in terms of hiring practices. So, like, how else, or maybe talking more on that, how else do you feel they can promote disability inclusion?
Well, for the corporate sector and for every other sector, as it were, we have a tool for promoting disability inclusion, and we call it the twin track approach. It's using an approach, a tool, and this twin track approach sees disabilities or treats disabilities sometimes as a standalone thematic issue, and other times as a cross-cutting issue. So in the corporate world, what is it that is happening in the corporate world? Who are those working in the corporate world? How might persons with disability be visible in the corporate world? And let me even sound a strong warning here, just to warn that, in fact, the corporate the sector, the private sector, is losing so much for not opening up the space for persons with disability to participate effectively, because there are huge untapped resources within that community. Smart, intelligent bunch of Nigerians, and you're closing the door. Imagine what that will do to your workforce and the productivity that you will get. So if the corporate sector, they would be quick to say, oh, we have a corporate social responsibilities, and so that's good. But we want to know, in your workforce, what is the affirmative action? What's the quota reserve for persons with disability to effectively work in your space? How friendly is your policy towards employing persons with disability? And if you're doing even your corporate social responsibility outside your workplace, what is it that you're looking at, that you're promoting? Let's take education sector. What is it that you're doing around the education sector that intentionally would promote inclusion for persons with disabilities? How have you thought about inclusive education, and how will your corporate social responsibility build on that to promoting the education, quality education for children with disability to effectively attend schools with non-disabled children, so that they can build some kind of social capital and come back and be productive? So it depends on the pillar that we are looking at, and it depends on what they are supporting. But we're very much interested in getting into that workforce and that labor force to actually, participate. So we will now challenge them to say, okay, in your human resource manual, what are the disability components there? How are you recruiting? How are you making, everything across the line? And that will be that cross-cutting issue that we are talking about now. And it's not just like, okay, pushed aside to all only disability institutions. I want to see that happening in agriculture sector. I want to see that happen in trade and industry, maybe across all sector, health, education, whatever it is. There's that component. And when you want to set some funds aside to do some interventions, maybe to bring up, to address the exclusion or in issues of inclusion of persons with disabilities, then we can do that separately. But really, we want to be seen everywhere because disability indeed is a cross-cutting issue. So I don't have a particular model and say this is what you're going to do. I'm just going to look at what you are currently doing and beginning to examine or evaluate to see if that has taken the disability component into consideration. So that is the way we would want to go about this, and that's the way we've been going.
Interesting. So it's kind of more of like an assessment. Okay, is there an affirmative action for persons with disabilities, and actually losing money because some of the smartest people are actually persons with disability. So how are you leveraging a lot of that human resource to add value to your company? And you also talked about CSR. How do you further enable even young people with disabilities, that workforce coming afterwards, to make sure that you have a great workforce in not too distant future? One thing about this, you talked about it with regards to a chain, prior to when they get in the workforce, when they're getting out the door, and whether the workforce creates that enabling environment for them. So I'm going to say to the audience, if you have any questions for Ms. Umoh, please put that in the comment sections. There are a couple of questions already that are in the comments that will be answering. But if you have any more further, please add that as well. So I'm going to now transition it to our final question before we get to the audience. So this is just for us regular citizens. So how do we, and you had some touch points in each of the questions with regards to what citizens should do, but if you can just kind of round it out for all of us and say, hey, this is the call to action for you. What can you do as a citizen to actively participate in disability inclusion?
A very broad one, but I will.
You did have some touch points throughout the conversation.
Yeah, I remember I touched on a few. So, first of all, I want us to change our mentality before we even talk of disability inclusion. Let's start from ourselves. Let's begin to unlearn everything that is promoting exclusion and learn some new things that will promote inclusion. Let's move on to understanding the fact that persons with disabilities are a natural part of any society. And because they are humans, they are entitled to whatever rights. We are not asking for special rights, not at all. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability did recognize that we cannot enjoy our fundamental human rights on equal basis with others. So it came up with some set of guidelines to enable us access those rights and enjoy it on an equal basis. So it's not as if, oh, human rights is different from disability right. No way. Human rights. But as persons with disabilities, clearly there are barriers and obstacles that will stand in our ways, stopping us from enjoying that our fundamental human right on an equal basis with others. So there are some set of guidelines. So professionally, it would be nice for us to begin to look at the UN Convention, what it says, and it's a kind of guidelines to help us understand how we are to promote disability inclusion. Articles by article, issues around accessibility, issues around education, issues around health, gender, reasonable accommodation, statistics, all kinds. It's a very huge document. I think for development practitioners, you need to understand that is like a guide. Although we can develop like a checklist for you or a template or further simplify it to make your work easier, but it's a document I want to reference. So apart from that very serious development work, and our daily lives. If you recognize that they are human beings entitled to whatever rights that anybody has, then you must treat them a little bit with respect. Accord them that human respect, and that is where the relationship starts. Because if you have that respect and you know it's human, perhaps your attitude will change a little bit. Again, in our small spaces, whatever we are doing, and I want to thank you for putting this together and for bringing on disability inclusion. You have demonstrated inclusion. You've been talking to other development practitioners, and you thought, okay, fine, we need to promote visibility for disability discourse. This is just one way. There's not just any rocket science around it. This is just one way. What is it that you're doing currently? You need to sit back and say, okay, I'm an NGO worker, or maybe I work in the finance sector. How are persons with disability around me? How are they benefit? Those simple questions will get you thinking, and perhaps it's not something you learn overnight, but once your attitude change and there's willingness for you to promote disability inclusion, then collectively we can all join hands, and that will be easy. So it's not for me to describe to you, but just begin to ask yourself in that little corner, your little corner, what is it that you're doing? How are persons with disability part of your whole project design or whatever? Then if your answer is, oh, I'm not including them, then get to us. Absolutely, together we'll drive that. But please, could you just change your attitude and just be a little bit more respectful of persons with disability, knowing fully well they're entitled to whatever rights you have. And keep your eyes too on the barriers and see how you can collectively remove those barriers. By removing those barriers, they can only promote inclusion.
That is, thank you so much for that. Even you talked about attitudinal change. I saw a comment here, which will transition to the comment. It says here that the people living with disabilities tend to be looked down on. So, which is you're referring to making sure that there is attitudinal change. If there's attitudinal change, then there will be more inclusion. Which is it's an observation, but we want to make sure that there is more inclusion. So, I have a few questions from Mrs. Joyce Gannon. She said here, what should inclusion look like in a civic society? So you've talked about what should happen for us to have inclusion. So she said, what should it look like in a society?
What should inclusion look like? SDG has just told us that this slogan, leave no one behind, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion is where everyone is able to participate.
Yeah.
Inclusion is where voices are heard. Inclusion is that your program does not intentionally, maybe out of sight, marginalize. Inclusion is all of us working together, promoting a particular cause. So what is exclusion like? So when you ask me of inclusion in a civic society, I will want to answer it, exclusion, what will it look like? What is it that's happening in the civic space? And how visible are persons with disability within the civic space? And why are they not showing up in the civic space? I think that will be what is it. And you're losing, like in Nigeria, we keep saying we are 30 million. That's true. It's because we are projecting from the WHO World Report on Disability of 2011, which says that we're not less than 15% of any given population. Okay, so if you do 15% of 200 million going in Nigeria, it means we're over 30 thereabout, if I remember my arithmetic very well. So what will it look like? Is everyone participating? Is everyone contributing? Is everyone showing up? So if you're talking about, gender issues, women must be included, then you know that we are not homogeneous when it comes to disability. There are also women with disabilities. So in the civic space, we are pushing for gender at 35 affirmative action. What is happening to women with disability within that 35? Are they participating in the process? So within your content and process of your work, how are they showing up? So for me, if I see visibility, we are all visible all the spaces, means we are participating. And that participation to me shows some level of inclusion. Although I can show up in this space and not actively participate, but then again, once I show up, we'll be killing the issues of invisibility. We mustn't leave anyone behind in our design approach. So this question she's asking is another semester question that
So I think she had what she asked. She has a couple of questions in the comments, but I think this one
Okay.
is quite comprehensive with a comment. She said, "Where will citizens learn social inclusion? I know it should be natural for people to value lives regardless of their life challenges. We know this is not the case. I think there should be more intentionality in our public education." I think it's so it's kind of like, how can the movement be more deliberate in terms of how citizens learn social inclusion?
Absolutely, and that is why I was saying you separate it from social inclusion, just like saying, how do you learn love? How do you learn to be nice? Where do you learn to be nice? So, but when we begin to contextualize it in terms of development, that is when we begin to look at our policies, our programs, our laws. So, for everything that you're doing, we use the disability lens. We are censoring and looking at where are the gaps and what is not. I agree with her completely. It has to be deliberate, and that is within the development space now.
Thank you so much. I have a question by Dr. Bridget Egboha. She says here, which is a very hot topic, how do you involve people with disabilities in politics?
Hey, we are already there. Thank you so much for that question. I must tell you that if there's anything else that we don't know, it is not politics. We are very politically aware. And I remember every time when it's close to an election year in Nigeria and the politicians they are engaging, we don't beg. We just brag with our numerical strength. And we say, hey, man, we have about 30 million persons with disabilities. We have this numerical strength. And if politics is all about numbers, then you can't joke with us. So, but that is not enough to bring about participation in politics. We do realize that there will be some barriers in getting to the political space. We've been crowded out of the space because nobody saw our values until we started using our numerical strength to negotiate. So now, coming in active politics, we want to be electoral, we want to campaign, we want to stand in for offices, or want to run for offices. How do we get in there? We know the problem. And let's take it a little bit to the women in politics. I like to come from known to the unknown. What are the things that are standing before, against women effective participation in politics? We know of the economic cost. We know of the social cost. And all of those things are very true for persons with disability, including the barriers that I spoke about initially. So we had worked closely with INEC on a couple of things to develop, policies that will address those barriers that may just stand against persons with disability actively participating in politics. And those are just simple barriers to ensure that we vote and be voted for. But entering into the politics, we have to start looking at political parties. What are they saying? Have we ever been candidates? What is stopping us from being candidates? And if politics is very, very expensive, the cost of politics, we know what it is everywhere, even in Nigeria. And these are a bunch of people who are so poor, really, really income poor. How would they have that financial power to really dare that space? So we don't have independent candidates. Even if we do, we don't have money for campaigns and all of that. So there are many pillars to this. While we are addressing the obvious barriers that we can actually address, we're taking the fight to political parties. What does the political party, does their political party constitution looks like? I mean, how is it? How do they select their candidate or run for office? In their political structure, in their political party structures, who are the leaders? We don't just want to be what they call it, some call it disabled leaders, I don't know, some call leaders of persons with disability. What stops us from being a secretary general or planning and organizing secretary of a political party? So the fight we go to the political parties and the politicians, and not until we effectively engage them on value added. No politics, they don't have emotions in politics. It's all about value added. Everybody wants to see. So for us, we are getting ready, and in this current constitutional review, we are seeking for a bill. We are looking at those clauses in the constitution that can give us some level of affirmative action where we can actually be at the decision-making table. We are trying to look at the Uganda model that reserves seats for persons with disability. We are contested amongst themselves and getting there. Just this morning, I heard colleagues from Uganda are celebrating because one of them has been appointed minister. One of our colleagues, a person with disabilities, now a minister in Uganda. And one of them, again, as speaker at the councillor level, on the ward level. So Uganda has this affirmative action that is so wonderful, which we are pushing Nigeria should adopt if we want to be visible in politics, because we need to be at the decision-making table and contribute to nation building. So this is just a step we need to go. There are layers of it. But we've started addressing that, but we need to take the fight again close to the political parties so that can happen.
That is really interesting, because a lot of times that's the key, is going into the political parties and then doing the advocacy within there, and then and should one political party implement, the others could just replicate. But this was quite comprehensive. Thank you so much. We have
sorry, let me just please, I just forgot some. Let me just drop this in as well. Just to also add to this, please, could you check Article 29 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability? It speaks to political participation and public life. That will give you a blueprint on what needs to be done to, so that the space can be opened up for us to get in there.
Interesting. Thank you. That is extremely insightful. So, well, we've gone to different aspects of the conversation and conversations with the audience. So do you have any final thoughts for us?
Nothing, just to reiterate that we are here. We are over 30 million in Nigeria, and that is too huge a number to be ignored in any development efforts. And Nigeria will be losing so much if they don't tap into the untapped resources that is within the disability community. And that we are ready to build, if only collectively we can join hands to remove those barriers that currently stand in our ways. And that persons with disability are extremely resourceful. And we need to really tap into the kind of energies that they have for nation building. And please think inclusion, dream inclusion, practice inclusion. Inclusive development is good for everyone. That would be my final thought.
Thank you so much. That was a really good way to conclude this. I just want to tell you that, I mean, in terms of this interview right now, we've gotten a lot of engagement in this conversation with you, almost kind of more than the others that we've had with other colleagues. So it looks like people are really interested in really wanting to understand inclusion of persons with disabilities. And so thank you again so much, Ekaete, for the great work that you've been doing over the years to make sure that there is inclusion. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure. Anytime. And do leave my contact with anyone who wants to engage further, because this time is just too short for us to really deep into inclusion.
Definitely, it's really a lot to cover, and yes. I mean, for me, I feel like you were able to really just let us know from the beginning how inclusion should start in terms of personally, and in all three sectors. We talked about the government sector, how you engage with government, the corporate sector, what they need to do, and then the development sector. And then you even tied it in with, multilateral charters like the UN, the UN SDGs, and what have you. So really, really extensive interview in such a short period of time. And thank you so much for doing what you do best.
Thank you, my pleasure. Please stay safe, stay well.
Will do. Take care.
All right, babe.
Bye-bye. So thank you all so much for attending this session of Devsectorseries with Ms. Ekaete Umoh. Please remember to join my mailing list and follow me on all my social media platforms. Again, Social Impact Consulting is on LinkedIn right now, so please follow the page so that we can continue to engage with you. And also, once you follow the social media handles, you will be notified when we go live. Next episode will come your way on next Wednesday, which is a week from today. We're
and then the environment was cleaned up.
The first time I was hearing about this stuff, it was totally new to me.
Ekaete with social impact consulting.